Welcome to the UpLevel Podcast, Njeri. Thank you for saying yes to this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, everyone's heard your bio and the work you're into the world, and they've heard me say a little bit about why I felt it was really important to have you come and speak to us in this context of right relationship. That's the theme of the season. And when I think of the work that you're doing and who I know you to be in the world, I really want to explore right relationship in the context of caretaking
Okay.
because so many folks are in that situation. And then also like of a generation that is really stepping into caring for their elders.
Okay.
So really wanting to explore that and also grief because you've really stepped deep into some grief work. And it's palpable right now. Humans are grieving because of the rate of shifts and change on the planet. So why
Absolutely.
don't we start with, I've been asking most people this first question. How are you defining right relationship? How would you define that?
I would define right relationship for me is being surrendered to the possibility of what's available to me as a divine being having a human experience.
Mm. What does that mean for folks who, that might be like a new concept, a new idea?
What it would mean is, are you being your authentic self and nurturing the being that you envision yourself being, wanting to show to the world?
And that process allows one to be in right relationship.
Yes,
Yeah.
because once you're in right relationship with yourself, you can organically be in right relationship with everything and everyone around you.
Hmm.
Because it's
Okay.
more difficult to pretend to be something that you're not and navigate what is true.
Yes to that. And part of what we're seeing with humanity right now is like the collapse of these systems, these ways of being, and it feels hard for some folks right now. And there's a lot of grief in that because there is these major transitions happening. What are you
Yes,
seeing?
I'm seeing a loss of identity.
Huh.
And what's happening in my observation, what's happening is when systems are built, you project yourself into an identity that you believe should be, as opposed to being in a space of being. And so as these systems collapse, people are having to evaluate, who am I and what is important to me? What do I stand for? Because it's now being challenged.
Mhm.
I mean, especially in the political system, but also on an individual level. Because when the pandemic happened, people had to ask themselves, what kind of person am I? Am I a person that's caring, or am I a person that needs space and I don't have the bandwidth to care because I am so worried about my own self,
Mhm.
right? I think with the advent of social media being what it is, we got to see the projection of what people wanted us to see about them and not necessarily who they were. And with all of these things being so transparent, people are winding up in a space where they're questioning or asking, am I being what people expect me to be? Or am I being what I truly want to be in my being?
Beautiful. Well, let's go right into the caretaking piece and
Mm.
maybe starting with your personal story of
Yeah.
caretaking.
Yeah. So for me, I did not set out to be a caregiver. But I got a call in 2010, and my stepfather, my mom's husband, needed to have spinal surgery. And as a result of that, I made a decision to become their caregiver. And I moved my parents in with me, and for 13 years I was a primary caregiver. Now, at the time, I did not realize that I was consciously shifting from my world of being a writer producer in Hollywood to navigating a completely different sphere as a caregiver, and what those sacrifices would entail. Um, as a result, my mom has what is called spinal cerebellar ataxia. it was a neuromuscular disease, which meant that she needed full-time care. Um, and as a result of that, I had to figure out what was important to me as a daughter, what was important to our family as a caregiver, and what was important for my future as a professional.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times when you become a caregiver, especially a family caregiver, you wind up having to sacrifice something,
Yeah.
right? And in that sacrifice, there's grief. Now, at the time, I did not realize how much grief I was carrying or navigating in the process. Um, but I knew that I had to find a new way of being through that journey. And as I did that, my relationship with myself and my relationship with my parents grew.
Mm.
But yeah, my mom really needed me, and because of the surgery, my dad needed me. And so it was a 13-year journey of taking care of them, hands on, one on one, and figuring out where did my own life fit in, if at all, in that process. And sometimes it was where I had to step back from my own life to make their life a priority.
How
Um,
how would you apply the concept of right relationship to your experience of caregiving?
I think the concept of right relationship, in my experience of caregiving, would be that I had to be clear about what my intention was and what my motivation was, because it's very easy to be in wrong relationship as a caregiver because of the overwhelm, because of the stress, because of the financial burden of being a family caregiver. Which is why I founded the Carebox Network, which supports caregivers and tries to meet them where they are in their journey. Some people need to hear that they're not alone, that it's okay. And then some people literally just need physical support in terms of like supplies or whatever. So being in right relationship meant me being clear about what was important and necessary, and learning to say no to things that were going to be a detriment to the unit. And so I had to learn to, I used to often call ourselves the Three Musketeers.
Yeah.
And so for us to be in right relationship, I had to consider every decision that I made, how it affected not only myself, but how it affected us as a unit.
So this is I know that there's a lot of people going through this, navigating. There always has been, but also the population, the age brackets where we're at. There's a lot of folks moving into that phase of caring for their parents,
Yeah.
and in your situation, it maybe happened sooner because of some of their physical challenges. About 2.5 years ago, my brother and I had to navigate my mom into assisted living.
Hmm.
And it was one of the most challenging times of my life because to really kind of take over the legal and medical responsibility of an adult,
Hmm.
it's very different than doing it for a child.
Yeah. To be an
Yeah.
advocate.
To be an advocate, and in these systems where we started talking about these systems that are like archaic and toxic and bureaucratic and just not working for in the best interest of the human. um I found it so challenging, and one of the things when I think about right relationship is the part of me that does things to be the good daughter, the good sister, the people pleaser, and then there's the one in me that's like, I actually can't do this and hold my life the way I want to hold it.
Yeah.
And then reconciling that. So,
Yes.
yeah, what's your experience in navigating that tension?
I surrendered,
Mm.
and not in a bad way. Because people hear surrender and they think give up, and that's not really what surrender is to me. Surrender is living in a state of allowing and in a state of um, letting go of againstness.
Mm.
And so for me, yes, the same thing happened. I knew that I could not coexist fully in the life that I had, in the life with the life I was stepping into as a caregiver. But I also weighed, because there's always the scales of life, right? I also weighed whether I would ever have this opportunity again.
Mhm.
And the answer was no.
Mhm.
I get one shot. It's like Eminem says, right? You get
Yeah.
one shot.
You one shot.
I get one shot to do this right
Yeah.
because it's my mom's life.
Mm.
As the universe, whatever you believe, universe, God, um, Buddha, whatever it may be, as the universe would have it, no matter what your religion is, to those that are faithful, even to themselves, right? And recognizing that service is really about showing up. I think I was able to allow myself to not necessarily shoot for being like an executive producer in TV,
Mhm.
that this would be okay for now, and whatever was supposed to or what is meant for me would come later. And what has come later has been way beyond what I could have ever hoped, dreamed, or imagined. But it was really hard in the beginning because I wasn't against this.
Mm.
I was like, this is how I should do it. This is how I should show up as the good daughter.
Mhm.
This is how I should show up, as a good writer, producer, or caregiver for that matter.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, I started to spin after a couple of years of that, which is kind of how I found myself to USM, right?
Mhm.
I said, this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Um, and then once I learned the principles of really being in the isness of what is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it sounds weird to say it that way, but that's what it is, right? A lot of people joke and say it is what it is, but it really is what it is.
Mhm.
Um, and that's how you wind up being in right relationship with
Mm.
whomever you're with.
Yeah.
Because when we're trying to show up as something,
Yeah, like a role and identity versus like just be here, be
in
present
this
to
moment,
this in this moment with this person or this circumstance, just be here.
yeah, just be and hold the space for yourself and maybe hold the space for them.
Yeah.
That's how you wind up in the right relationship.
Yeah.
Because when you're trying to control, which is always an illusion anyway,
Yeah.
when you're trying to control a situation or manage a situation in a certain way, then you realize how out of control it is.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then you're having this compounded effect in the situation of caregiving, whether you're putting someone in whether you're helping someone be in an assisted living home, whether you're managing the care with another caregiver, or whether you're managing the care yourself, you find yourself in a state of anticipating. And in
Yes.
that state of anticipating, you're now in fight or flight.
Yes.
And now that
Oof.
you're in fight or flight,
Yeah.
now your nervous system is responding.
Yep.
Once your nervous system responds, now you're starting to have your own physical challenges.
Mhm.
I think it's really quiet that a lot of caregivers or people responsible for the care of someone else, they often become ill themselves. And it is because they're living in a state of fight or flight
Yeah. I can
as a
totally
result, as a result of anticipation.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that in my experience. And then like for a whole year after, just trying to support the integration of my mother into like her new life and the new systems. And actually, what it took was she said to me, "Stop. which I'm blessed that like she what is coherent enough to know like she saw what I was doing to myself as a result of, I'm trying to support. And she's like, it is what it is. She did say that this is where my life is now and it's okay. And you are not responsible. Oh my gosh, I'm getting teary eyed just thinking about it because I feel like my younger self needed to hear those words, probably when she was a girl, but heard it in her 40s. It's like,
Yeah.
you are not responsible. You are doing the best you can. It is enough, and yet it's still this constant process of reconciling, like, could I do more
Yeah.
for her, um, and I just think your story is so beautiful and so interesting. And I'm curious because now you're working with other folks who are stepping into or are in a position of caregiving.
Hmm.
And what's your guidance when someone's like, I actually don't think I can surrender and it doesn't feel like my authentic self to serve in this way. I can serve in a different function. Like maybe it's like providing financially. So things like that. What's your guidance when that comes up?
When that comes up, I often am like, that's okay. Not everybody is called or built to operate in that capacity. Now, I will say, when I was in the beginning stages of being a caregiver, there was judgment when people would say that to me.
Yeah.
Because how could you not give the love back that you were given, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that every journey, much like everybody's grief journey, right, is individual and unique,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so everyone knows the individual answer that they have for themselves, and they know what their bandwidth and capacity is based on their individual circumstance.
Hmm.
And so it really is, trust yourself, whatever that is, and don't berate yourself or judge yourself for whatever decision you make. Because in the end, you're always doing the best you know to do in that moment. And so I offer to people that do wake up and say, yeah, this is not sustainable for me or for my family,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
And there are ways to navigate that. It is not everybody's calling, or everybody, or in every, because literally every family has a unique story
Most definitely.
that they are telling and that they are experiencing. Because a lot of times we attach our a lot of times we attach our perspective based on our experience to our events. An event is separate from whatever our story is. And so when you have grown up, let's say, needing someone to say you are enough, in that situation, you're judging yourself for not being enough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you were raised that you are enough, then you're like, whatever I do is going to be fine,
Hmm.
right? Because you don't have that need to prove anything.
Hmm.
So it's really an evaluation of, where am I in my own body,
Hmm.
so that I can support myself in whatever my decision is.
There's the right relationship part right there again.
Mhm.
So for folks who are stepping into or in a role of caregiving, taking care of yourself
Yeah.
is mission critical. I mean, that's just mission critical for all of us right now, what's happening.
Yeah. Hmm. I mean, because you can't really, it's like they say on the plane, put the oxygen mask on yourself first,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you can't serve from an empty cup. And I think, from a biblical sense, a lot of times we're talking about, you really can only serve from the overflow.
Mm. Say it again. Say it again.
You really can only serve from the overflow. Because it's not a half full, half empty anything. You can only truly serve from the overflow.
I'm just connecting a dot with the right relationship piece, right? A lot of this theory comes from indigenous culture. And
Hmm.
when I think about indigenous peoples and the respect for the land, the animals,
Yes,
the spirit world, it was never about, you never would take more than you needed.
exactly.
So that there was that overflow because the ecosystem is constantly in this reciprocal give and
Balanced
take.
it. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And so thank you for bringing it through the lens of being a caregiver, caregiving, and what that takes. This is
Hmm.
so important. And what has you used the language caregiver versus caretaker?
I use caregiver because the person is really giving care from themselves.
Mm,
I mean, caretaker to me, you know, and a linguist may disagree with me, but caretaker to me adds a connotation of literally taking from instead of pouring into. And so for me, I'm like, no, I'm not taking anything in this process. I am receiving. There's giving on both ends.
mm.
I'm giving love and support, and what I am receiving is gratitude and joy. Gratitude for the opportunity, appreciation for the moment, a deeper loving and understanding and respect for the process. But when you're taking, you're only thinking about lack,
Yeah.
and you're operating in a cycle of lack, you know?
Yeah, it feels really important again, my job here is to bring this context of right relationship, and it's like, the language we use is so important.
It's everything.
It's everything.
There is life and death in your words,
Mhm.
literally, because your brain, neurologically, your brain does not know the difference between reality and your thoughts. It doesn't.
Mm.
They have proven it in science. Scientifically, your brain does not know the difference between the rumination of your thoughts versus the physical action that you're doing in real life, which is why you can program yourself to be in a different state of being. Which is why, if you wanted to learn how to do piano, you could literally visualize it and then sit at a piano and do it.
Yeah,
And I think people forget that there's power in their thoughts.
so much so.
And those thoughts are governed by the languaging that you have and you use, right? I'll give you a really good example. My father had passed a year prior. My mom passed in like like a year following, maybe a little bit more than the year following. And we were on our way to the movies. She stopped breathing. I did CPR, I called 911, and they thought she was gone. And I, in an audible voice, said, God, I know what you're doing, but I can't have you do it right now. I get it. You will get no argument from me, but I can't have you do it right now. And as soon as I uttered those words, they said, we got her back. Because I needed to be in right relationship with my brother.
Mm.
I knew my mom was leaving us, but I had to be in right relationship with my brother. And so I petitioned that we get the opportunity to do it together. because there's power in our words and our thoughts and our energy.
Mhm.
Energy goes beyond ourselves. You can change the energy of a room by walking in it. And I'm often reminded of, how do you show up when you walk into a room?
Mm.
Are you bringing life or are you bringing death?
So important.
And that's
Oh,
across the board, right?
yeah.
Be responsible for the energy you bring.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, especially in these times, if one is tuning into this, there's a certain level of advantage that one has. So it's like to think about, my energy is an offering. It is an
Yes.
offering. And what do I want to offer when I enter that room? In a virtual room, it's same impact as a real live room. Yeah. Yeah, we often say in like the leadership development work that we do. So you're always having an impact, even if you're not talking or leading the conversation. Your energy is impacting the space. So take responsibility for that. It's such an important, I think, leadership teaching. And in this moment in time, really important for people just to sit with, what is the impact I'm creating with my energy.
Yeah. And that's,
So
I mean, I think that's what's key across the board in any industry, in any right relationship, right? Is, what is the energy you're bringing to the relationship?
yes.
What is your state? Because as Tony Robbins also always says, where energy goes, energy flows. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
focus goes, energy flows, right? And so that's the thing. What are we focusing on when we wake up? What are we focusing on when we walk into a room? What are we focusing on when we set an intention?
Hmm. Hmm.
You
Well,
know?
speaking of intentions, and we're like getting into the arc of the conversation where I really want to talk about grief, but I want to talk about it in the context of endings. And,
Yes.
people, loved ones leaving the planet, jobs ending, relationships ending, places of extracurricular living endings,
Yeah.
and the intentionality of really consciously completing with these arcs. And you shared when we were preparing a beautiful story about one of the ways you've done that with your parents. Would you be willing to share that with our
Oh,
listeners?
oh, sure, sure. So when my mom passed, I just gave the cliff note of how I asked the universe to give her some more time, that I was in complete understanding that she was passing. Um, and in the hospital, my intention was to give my brother the opportunity to be in ritual with me as we let her transition. And I think what's a lot of what's been lost in death and end of life, is ritual, right? It is the understanding that life is precious and that it is transformative, and that in the end, you can put a bow on it. And so what we did was, for me, what I did was I took the first day and I called in her ancestors. I sat with her, I prayed with her. I held her hand, I spoke to her. And I could feel the energy of her body. And there's something to be said for peace. I think we're so caught up in the doing that we forget to surrender to the
Mm.
being in the space, being in the moment, being in the love, and being in the appreciation. Did I want to let my mom go? Absolutely not. But what would be in a right relationship with her spirit?
Mm.
And so I spent, I want to say at least 12 to 18 hours just sharing energy with her.
Beautiful.
And the following day, I said to them, I said, I need you to turn off all of the alarms. I need you to allow us to be in communion with her. And I had a video from years ago of her husband singing his favorite song, which was You Never Walk Alone.
Oh,
And I turned on the video and I played it. And as he's singing You Never Walk Alone, I'm laying in the bed, in the hospital bed with my mom, as we unplug her and let her drift off into her next life.
wow.
And I laid there. I want to say because we were waiting for the chaplain. So I laid there until the chaplain got there. And when he touched her hand, he was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. I was in all white on purpose.
Mm.
And he said to me, you know, in some cultures, what white means. I often wear white, not all the time, but often. um, and he touched her as he prayed with us. And he said, she's still warm.
Mm.
He said, and he equated it to the love I had for her. And the fact that I was laying there holding her, my body heat was keeping her warm.
Mm.
And I really think that's what life is about. Life is about holding the hand or giving the energy that needs to be given in the moment so that everyone in your space can feel safe, right? There's no better way to be in right relationship than in safety, in respect, in acknowledgement, and witnessing of the human. Because energy is never destroyed, it's just transformed. We learned that in basic physics, right? It is never destroyed, it's only transformed. So, what does it really mean to be in communion with a soul? Because our bodies are just suits. What's really important is what's underneath and what's in us energetically, because that lives on forever.
Amen, sister. Those are some words of medicine. You're just dropping it like it's hot over here on the UpLevel podcast, Jerry. That is beautiful. And gosh, I'm so grateful that I pinged you because I feel like just in personally, I'm really trying to learn that. I'm really working hard to learn that one,
Mhm.
and what I know is I have to create more space.
Yeah.
um, the forever to-do list and the amount of responsibilities gets in the way of my ability to do what you just spoke to so eloquently.
Mhm.
And I trust I'm not alone, on that with our listeners.
No, I think we're conditioned to be in the doing
Hmm.
because it's all about metrics, right?
It's all
It's
about
all
metrics.
about what do I get? What can I grow? Right?
Yeah.
The growing will happen if you're being. You get to choose which direction you want to grow by being.
Hmm.
If I choose to be in the light of whatever it is I'm doing, then I'm going to automatically grow. It's just like a seed in the ground.
Hmm.
Now you may not reap the harvest as quickly as people would like to in this world of instantaneous gratification, right?
Yeah.
But if we're talking about beingness, and if we're talking about right relationship, if we're talking about the balance, right, then we're really talking about process. we're really talking about stages. We're really talking about growth in a way that is not harmful, a way of growing that is respectful, a way of growing that is acknowledging the value that each person brings to a situation.
And even as a being is their body's decaying, or not functioning the way
Mhm.
it used to, there's so much value that they have to give and offer. And even like our conversation can go into how our society holds elders, and how it doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't hold elders. There's just so much work to be done to be in right relationship.
Totally. I mean, a lot of a lot of people, it's funny that this comes up. A lot of people made the assumption that because my mom had spinal cerebellar ataxia, that her baseline state of being was that of not being able to engage. And that could have been that was for nothing could have been further from the truth.
Hmm.
So when she actually had her stroke, when she had her first stroke, they said to me, "This is normal." I said, "No, this is not normal. I am with this woman every day in, day out. I know every inch of her. This is not normal. This is not her baseline." And they were like, "Well, this is a disease." I said, "I know the disease she has. Everyone in my mom's generation died from the disease that my mom had
Wow.
between the ages of 54, I want to say, and 62.
Wow.
Her 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 siblings, her generation and her family was eliminated by the age of 62 in because of that disease. I said, "I am very familiar. This is not what's happening." And they gave her a CAT scan. They said, "Well, we don't really see that much activity in the CAT scan." I said, and this is where advocacy is important for caregivers, just to backtrack a little bit.
Hmm.
Advocacy is important because doctors don't always know because they're not the person that is with your person all the time.
Yeah.
And as a result, fight for what you know in your gut is right. You don't have to be a doctor to do that. And so what I said to them was, "You did the test. She has an infection, which means you have to keep her overnight. And I want you to give her an MRI." And when they gave her an MRI, she had had a major stroke in her right pons. And all of the neurologists came to her room like, "How did you know she had a stroke?"
Mm.
I said, "Because I know her. I know her energy. I know how her eyes open.
Yeah.
I know how she sees me. I know how she breathes.
Mm.
And as a result, I knew something was wrong."
Yeah.
And I said to my mom when I woke up that morning and I saw her, I said to her, I said, "You acting like you had a stroke." Now I didn't know for sure it was a stroke, but when she became less responsive in the way I was used to her responding, I said, "This is not right." And I had a lot of professionals in that moment. In that next hour,
Hmm.
the home health nurse refused to call 911. She called 411. Like I was overreacting.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and this is my advice to people, sometimes it does warrant a little overreacting
Yeah.
because there's urgency in things like that.
Yeah. And only you can know because
And
you,
only
like you
you
said,
can know.
you've been with the person and also you're tuning into your own intuition and your
Yeah.
familiarity with the person.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, it's like if you are being in right relationship with yourself, you'll have the courage to stand up,
Exactly.
against that ecosystem, which is really can be really scary. And
Yes.
if it's so important. It's such an important part of this caregiving.
Take time to know you so that you know how you can show up.
Yeah.
If there's
Sure.
anything, take time to know you so that you know how you can show up.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you need, other allies and support because it's not your strong suit, then
Yes.
enroll them, right? Like, in the coaching world, we talk about this concept of designed alliance, which is, like, really consciously designing our roles together, who's responsible for what. And so, I know within the process of supporting my parents, my brother and I, we've taken time to have those conversations. Um, Maybe not quite to the extent that I would with, say, one of my colleagues, because he doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have this context or the same tools. But it's important to say, what are your strengths? What are my strengths? Who's responsible for what?
Mhm.
Who's going to navigate this part? It's so
Delegate.
important. Delegation and some
Assignment and system.
agreements, assignment and systems, right? This is all part of what you teach in your course. Yeah.
I teach those things in my courses, and I really teach that we forget that through all of that as a caregiver, let's say before end of life,
Hmm.
you are operating in a system that is anticipatory grief, no matter how you're caregiving, right? And to be cognizant of that, right? Because anticipatory grief is a real thing. You are grieving the loss of a job, a loss of finances, the loss of freedom, a loss of identity, and in some cases, friendships and marriages, right? In the midst of all these systems and delegation and enlistment or enrollment that we're talking about, right? And then at end of life, you're dealing with the loss, the sadness, the mourning, because grief and mourning are two different things, right? You're dealing with the aftermath of what may not have been set up before the end of life. And your life will never and I cannot say this loud enough or clear enough. After the loss of that magnitude, whether it be a spouse, whether it be a parent, whether it be a child, please understand whatever was normal before will never be normal again. There is no rewinding the clock. And a lot of people, it's hard to hear, but grief doesn't go away. It just transforms and transmutes.
Mhm.
You get to choose how you show up with it and navigate it. Sometimes it takes longer than you want it to take, but until you allow it to have its own space and breathe, then it will continue to fester and grow inside of you. Which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Um, is that you go from the initial feelings, emotions, reactions to the event of loss of life, to the stories, to the stages of grief, to the misbelief that there's a timeline for grief, because that's a misbelief. There is no timeline for grief. Your journey is your journey, however long it takes. And there's this misbelief that you can't choose how you show up in your grief. You can't, the consequence of grief is that it shows up when it wants to, but we get to choose how we embrace it or reject it. I choose to embrace my grief and honoring. How am I honoring the loss that I've had? How am I honoring myself? How am I showing up for myself? And not everyone is ready to be in a space of living without. But I offer to them to live within. Live within the memory of how great it was. Live within the love, because the price of love is grief, no matter what it is. If you love your job and you lose it, you're going to grieve it when it's over. You love your child and you raise them and they go to college, you're going to grieve when they leave your house. You love your parent and it's their turn, no matter how old they are. They can be 50, they can be 100. It is the same sense of loss. But within that loss, there was a level of love, because you wouldn't feel what you feel if there wasn't. So, how do we embrace the love? How do we choose to show up and navigate? How do we decide to be in right relationship in the midst of the relationship changing?
Hmm. And how do we be in right relationship with our own personal grieving process? Like
Yeah.
to allow it to be its unique thing. I was having a conversation with a client yesterday who lost a parent recently. And I'd love to hear your guidance for folks who are in the workplace and they
Mhm.
just feel like they can't, there's no place for their grief, their vulnerability, and they're experiencing things like brain fog and things that
Yeah,
come from grief, and compartmentalizing and not feeling like they can express it. It's not safe to express it in some work contexts. What's your guidance
absolutely.
to those types of people?
My guidance for those type of people that are in those situations, let's evaluate how acute is your grief when if you're still going to work, because you may need to consider taking time off.
Yeah.
You may need to consider setting up some system of delegation for a time period so that you give yourself the space. Now, if giving yourself the space physically is not possible from the job as a result of whatever is happening, I always say do micro moments, right? Where you dedicate, just like you block time to be productive. You can't tell your grief when to show up, right? But what you do get to do is, in the moments that you can control, let me do something that is going to support me in grounding myself in my body. Let me take a block of an hour of a, so if I have lunch, but I still have to show up at work, my lunch may be in isolation
Right.
so that I can get the opportunity to be with my thoughts proactively,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
My opportunity may be in taking breaks throughout the day where I am nurturing myself in a way that my nervous system doesn't have the need to expel itself, right? Because we're talking about pressure when we're talking about work.
Mhm.
We're talking about compounded pressure of the grief on top of the pressure for work, the missing on top of the work. It's kind of like what happened to me. I was 4 months out from my mom passing. I had a job with National Geographic, working on a television show, and we were on Zoom. And they were talking because the show was about a family and the family was coming together and working. And for whatever reason, in the midst of people talking about how the show needed to be put together and how the scene needed to change, I could feel the welling happening. I could feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna like lose it in a moment. I'm just sitting in silence on the Zoom with my screen on. And I send a little thing in the chat, direct message in the chat. I need to turn my screen off. I'm here. I just need to turn my screen off. I turn my screen off, I turn my sound off, and I have my moment.
Beautiful. Being in right relationship with yourself. Designing alliances, like, yeah, taking what you need in that moment, not stepping
You're
over it,
not gonna
shoving it
yeah,
down. Yeah,
they're not gonna lose the momentum because I turned my screen off.
yeah, for however long it was, it's yeah, or you stepped away. Yeah, yeah, so important.
S It's little micro things like that
Mhm,
that can help you navigate the day.
mm,
Even if it's, "Let me go in the bathroom for 5 minutes."
mhm.
No one's gonna question whether you gotta really go to the bathroom
Nope, nope, take that time.
because you don't know you can't control grief.
Mhm,
You can't control the activation of the emotions that are flooding your system because you're unregulated in the stages of acute grief, right? Which is when the event happens, right? A week, 2 weeks, a month in, 2 months in. For me, it was 5 months in. I was still being unceremoniously activated
yeah,
in the midst of pushing through and trying to keep my life together because a lot of times we say we got to keep our life together.
yep,
I don't have time to grieve or fall apart,
yeah, hear that all the time.
right?
Yeah,
Well, create time. Just like you create time for your meeting, create time to nurture yourself in your grief.
yes to this. Oh my gosh, Jerry, there's so much more for us to go on this topic. It's so rich, and you're just bringing such a potent wisdom to us.
Oh, thank you.
Um, I'm going to start wrapping us up. So please tell people where they can find you and find your work. Just know this will all be in the show notes, but give us like a bottom line, and then we'll
Okay.
wrap up with a final question.
Bottom line is my website for grief is liveinlight.com, which is LIVE, the letter N as in Nancy, LIGHT.com. Um, you can also find me on IG. There's a lot of good tools. There's a lot of good conversations that I've had on IG.
Mm,
So you may find your subject in there. I try to help people understand what kind of grief they're facing, whether it's living grief, which is something that is before end of life, or whether it's end of life grief. Because a lot of people can be in grief in relationships and think that they don't know what's happening. They're in the fog. And the reality is you're grieving the relationship you thought you needed to have. And you're still living in it. You can be in the relationship in grief. At any rate, I find a lot of people don't even realize that.
yeah,
Um, They can find me on IG at the same thing at Live in Light Today. Add the word today, and at Live in Light Today is also in my YouTube as well as my TikTok.
beautiful.
And you can send me messages there. In terms of caregiving, it is the CareBox Network .org because it is a 501c3. We welcome anyone that wants to be in partnership or sponsorship for that. We have been able to activate and support people in natural disasters, like we supported people in the hurricanes,
Amazing.
as well as the fires with supplies that they needed in the crisis. I would also like to let listeners know, please don't forget about people that have had tragedy happen through natural disasters in your area, because it takes years, not months or days or weeks for these things to be overcome. It is processes of years. There are people still struggling with the hurricanes. There are still people struggling with the fires. It may not be in your local news, but reach out to organizations that are in your area, mine or otherwise, right? We will go anywhere to meet anyone anywhere if we can. Um, but I think we are remiss in thinking that just because it's not on the news, it's not happening.
Yeah. Thank you
And
for
it
that reminder, and too, because it's a place where people can, if they want to be of service, it's a place where they can put their energy, their resources, because the state of like grieving that is so ongoing in those natural disasters, and I mean, it's
no,
happening so much.
I had someone show up to my live older guy, and he did not realize that he could grieve the loss of his. I mean, in the fires, I think people are aware that you can grieve the loss of your home. But like if you're in Georgia or you're in Wisconsin and you lose your home to foreclosure, you lose your home to a fire, you lose your home to a divorce, they don't realize that part of what they were feeling in that brain fog and that disassociation and that separation, that they were grieving, and sent me a message and was like, I had no idea I was grieving the loss of my home.
Oh my goodness. Carrie, I'm so grateful for our time together and this reconnection, and the work that you're doing is so palpable, and it's like you are so on purpose. I mean, you're such a testament of a human who took her situation, learned from it, and is serving from that place. So
Yes.
thank you for your leadership and for your love and all of the wisdom you brought us today.
Thank you. I often like to say, let's live in light and love and learning.
Aho to that.
Thank you for having me.